Welcome. This is the 48th episode of the Clements Bookworm, and I'm Angela Unk, Director of Development here at the Clements Library. This program is being recorded to share online, and this afternoon you will receive an email with the recording and any resources that are mentioned during today's broadcast as well. I just want to mention, in case you're joining us for the first time, a little bit about how we like to use Zoom. Please feel free to chime in the chat and change the setting to everyone. That way we can all participate in the conversation. My colleague Ann Bennington-Helber will be monitoring the chat and putting some resources in there for you as we go along. If you have a specific question, though, please put that in the Q&A section. That way we keep all the questions together, and you can also see the questions that others are asking and give it a thumbs up to upvote the question and change the order. We have the live machine captioning turned on today as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion program. You can toggle that on or off, and you can also change the size of wording. I do have side-by-side mode enabled so that you can see both the slides and the speaker, but I can only control so much of what you see. So please play around with the separator and other things on your specific screen to get it to look how you would most like it. This program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library, located on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The Clements Library's mission is to collect, preserve, share, and promote the study of primary sources related to all aspects of history and culture in North America and the Caribbean to about 1900. The University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered ceremonially as a gift in the text of the Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids, so that their children could be educated in a Western manner. We acknowledge the history of Native displacement that allowed the University of Michigan to be founded. Today, we reaffirm contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabe ties to this land and their profound contributions to this institution. The William L. Clements Library also acknowledges that it has and continues to benefit from the original land dispossession and established hierarchies of settler colonialism. All right, everybody, it's your last chance to quickly click on the poll question. I am going to end the poll and share the results. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you remember selling something for a school or extracurricular activity as your first introduction into volunteering philanthropically. And so I think that makes sense to me. That's one of my first memories too. And I'd love to hear some of the other descriptions in the chat, and I know Amanda would as well. Today's episode is sponsored by Kristen Cabral, class of '88, and Clements Library Associates board member. Thank you, Kristen, for sponsoring today's episode and for your participation in the Bookworm. Speaking of the Clements Library Associates, it's really appropriate that today's fellow focus episode spotlights fundraising in at the Clements Library because it is our 75th anniversary of the founding of the Clements Library Associates. On October 24th, 1947, the U of M Regents established the Clements Library Associates. And since then, they've helped fundraise for acquisitions and spread the word about the Clements. Today, anyone who makes a donation is a member of the Clements Library Associates. So happy anniversary to the Clements Library Associates. You can read more. We'll provide a link to this issue of the Quarto that talks more about the establishment. I'm happy to welcome Amanda Moniz to the Bookworm this morning. Amanda is the David M. Rubenstein Curator of Philanthropy at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. She curates a long-term exhibit, Giving in America, and is building the Smithsonian's collection of objects telling stories about Americans' historical experiences, giving, fundraising, and working in and using charitable institutions. Her book, From Empire to Humanity, The American Revolution and the Origins of Humanitarianism, was awarded Arnova's inaugural Peter Dobkin Hall History of Philanthropy Book Prize. She is currently working on a biography of Isabella Graham, an immigrant widow who transformed philanthropy in early national New York, and is grateful to the Clements Library for supporting research in its collections about Graham. Moniz received her PhD in history from the University of Michigan in 2008, and during graduate school, she worked at the Clements as a curatorial assistant in the manuscripts division. Welcome to the program today, Amanda.
Thank you so much. It's really a thrill and honor to be here.
Well, I know that you and I had a chance to talk when you were at the Clements for a short-term fellowship. Can you tell us a little bit more about the project and what you found in the Clements collections?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Okay, and I share my screen to show an
Yes,
image of
please
Isabella
do.
Graham. Terrific. Let me do that. You can see who it is. All of you have helped. Who it is that your support has helped me research. So let me show you this. Can you see that? This is Isabella Graham. As Angela mentioned, she was a transformative philanthropic leader in early national New York, but she was an unlikely founding figure. She was born in Scotland in 1742, had a comfortable childhood. She married a man, John Graham, who was a British Army physician, and in the late 1760s, the family followed his regiment to Canada and Fort Niagara, where they had several daughters and acquired 2 enslaved native girls. And Belle, she was known as Belle, was responsible for managing the enslaved native girls. From Fort Niagara, they moved to Antigua, where John died. They went with his regiment. And Belle fell into what we today would call a depression, struggling financially too, with 4 young children. She moved back to Scotland and after several years managed to start pulling her life together, establishing a business, running a boarding school in Edinburgh, and getting active in the charitable scene there. So she was sort of pulling herself together, but still financially in debt. And in 1789, knowing there was a business opportunity in New York City to open a girls' boarding school, she moved to New York with her family. And there she got involved in charitable activity once she had retired from business. She really made that her life's work and became this transformative leader and one of the most notable female leaders in the early republic. But while she was nurturing young girls as an educator and supporting broken families through her charities aimed at girls and women, she was still struggling to heal her own family from the difficulties they'd had over the years. So as it happens, her daughter and son-in-law's papers are at the Clements. And while I was there on the one-week fellowship, I had the opportunity to consult those papers, learn more about the family dynamics, activities in their church, which were fundamentally important to them. And I also had the opportunity to look at the Gage papers and get more of a sense of what life at Fort Niagara was like. So it was really a phenomenal week of research, and I'm very grateful, again, to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks. And it's good to hear, how you can connect different collections like that in your research, because I think sometimes people wonder, what it takes to put that full story together. So I know that most people have not met a curator of philanthropy. So if you could tell us a little bit more about what you do as a curator of philanthropy, I think that would be great.
Terrific, thanks. And let me again share my screen. As it happens, I'm lucky because Angela is one of the early people to come see our exhibit at the National Museum of American History. And I'd like to show you a little bit, show all of you a little bit, just to give you a better sense of what a curator of philanthropy does. In 2015, the Smithsonian established the Philanthropy Initiative, which is a long-term effort to collect, document, and display objects relating to the history of philanthropy, as well as to convene important conversations about contemporary and historic issues in philanthropy. In 2016, this long-term exhibit, Giving in America, opened, and I didn't curate it originally. The museum first had the funds for the exhibit and then hired a curator, but I was involved a little bit as a script reviewer in the early development of the exhibit. And since the end of 2016, when I joined the staff, I've been responsible for it and recurated the exhibit several times. And I should note that the Philanthropy Initiative is supported through the generosity of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and David M. Rubenstein, with additional support from Fidelity Charitable. So this is what the exhibit looked like in 2018 when we were focusing on culture and the arts. And let me just give you a brief overview of the exhibit. Over here on the right side, the exhibit is organized, as you hopefully can see, around these questions of who gives, why do we give, what do we give, and how do we give. Then over here on the left, this section changes annually, with the exception of during the pandemic. And during the first 5 years, it's changed in conjunction with our annual philanthropy symposium's theme. And going forward, the theme, we're going to have a slightly different approach to how this, how we do this section. And we always display several Giving Pledge letters. You may be familiar with the Giving Pledge, which is a commitment by some of the world's wealthiest people to give their wealth to philanthropy. And over here we have this kiosk that has all Giving Pledge letters accessible, as well as more supplementary material about what's on view. So the exhibit highlights everyday philanthropists, prominent philanthropists, organizations, innovations in philanthropy, and it also tells the stories of people who use philanthropic institutions and people who work in philanthropic institutions. And I think what's important to me about it is it's in a prominent place in the museum. I mean, one of the things that's important to me is this exhibit's in a prominent place in the museum. People pass by, and what's really compelling is they often will see something that they can relate to. So while philanthropy may seem like it's not a relatable topic, and indeed that's why we call it Giving in America, it's an activity that is familiar to a lot of people, and they often share family stories, as we were sort of at the beginning, talking about how people have been involved in philanthropy. And let me just briefly turn to the current featured case. this section, Who Pays for Education, explores debates over the past couple hundred years about how Americans fund education through both public and private contributions, public and private finances. At the beginning, when Angela and I were chatting, she was mentioning that one of her kids has been doing some fundraising, school fundraising, including selling candy. And we have a candy fundraising box from a school in California on view here. And again, I think helping to emphasize the relatability of fundraising in so many people's lives.
Yeah, I definitely love that. And I do think, in your description, you talked a little bit about it's not just about the big household names, the big philanthropists and the people who are making, doing these giving pledges, which of course is super important, but it's such a long tradition of everyone being involved that we do indeed sort of forget sometimes that we're doing it, that we've participated in all sorts of ways. And so I do love that piece of it that reminds people that it's something that we've all participated in. So then going back to collecting the objects, because I think that's one of the things that is always so interesting as a curator, is trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you put together the collection to tell the story? So I'd love to hear more about some of the objects that you've collected.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll screen share again, because that's exactly it. My role is to curate the exhibit and to collect objects, as well as to mine the collection of our existing objects, to look at objects in new ways that may have been collected for some other reason, and to think about the philanthropy stories there. So let me screen share for a little bit, and I'll show you some of the objects I've collected or found in the collection, and talk about those. So this little box here on the left is one of my favorite boxes that's been in giving, favorite objects that's been in giving in America. I'm really interested, as I build the collection, in thinking about the work and industry of philanthropy. I'm interested in, of course, the stories of people who give, but I think it's vital that we understand the experiences of people who have done the hard work, either professionally or voluntarily, of raising money, because money doesn't raise itself, as all of you know from your effort. So I'd like to show you today a number of objects that show how people innovated and how they introduced new fundraising practices to America. And I think taken together, these objects tell a story of professionalization in fundraising and of elaboration of the field tied to larger trends in marketing and advertising and communications. But nevertheless, even though these stories tell a story, even though these objects tell a story of professionalization, I think they underscore that professional fundraisers have continued to rely on volunteers as essential partners in doing that hard work of raising monies for institutions, from food banks and hospitals to museums, and as many of you know from your own efforts, to remarkable libraries like the Clements. So let me start with this humble object here on the left. It's a collection box from the mid-1800s. It was donated to the Smithsonian by a collector who, as part of a larger donation of many objects. And we don't know the particulars of this box. We don't know who used it or for what causes, from New England in the mid-1800s, and that's about what we know. But we can use it, so we can't tell a particular story, but we can use it to talk generally about fundraising technologies in early America. That's what I love about it. It tells a story of how Americans introduced new technologies and fundraising to their communities. So yes, this is a technology. For some Americans in some communities, collection boxes such as this one were novel gizmos for fundraising endeavors, and people needed to be taught how to use them. Indeed, one of our foremost philanthropic innovators, Benjamin Franklin, appreciated that. In the mid 1800s, as you may know, Franklin and some colleagues established Pennsylvania Hospital as a public-private partnership in Philadelphia. And so fundraising, bringing in voluntary donations, was critical to its success. And as part of their multifaceted fundraising strategy, the volunteer managers of the hospital placed collections boxes in their home. They were homes. They were tin boxes, and they had lettering on it that said "Charity for the Hospital." And they were borrowing, they said, that technology, that idea, the practice from foreign countries where it was familiar. Unfortunately for them, this effort was a bust. And so you might think it was a bust because they placed the boxes in their homes. But homes in that era were more public. They were pretty busy places. So that wasn't what they attributed the failure to. Franklin explained that Philadelphians were unacquainted with the nature of and design of boxes like this, and that's why the effort wasn't successful. So fast forward a few decades to the early 1800s, fundraisers were still confronting the challenge of people not necessarily being familiar with these kind of boxes. As you may well know, in the early Republic, Americans threw themselves into establishing a large range of charities, and especially Sunday schools, tract societies, missionary societies. These evangelical charities had a huge impact on American philanthropy by spreading innovative practices and building infrastructure nationally for fundraising and philanthropic activity. That included familiarizing people with collections boxes, and charitable leaders took advantage of the era's booming communications revolution to explain how things like this worked in publications like this. And this is this here on the right is the Youth's Friend and Scholars magazine, an American Sunday School Union published magazine that featured stories that referred to collections boxes, so part of the way people were educated in using it. But this isn't just a story about charitable leaders educating people on new methods. It was the legions of volunteers around the country who did the groundwork of placing boxes, encouraging neighbors to give, and then making sure the money was collected and sent to the right place. They were vital in expanding and deepening the reach of these new philanthropic institutions and their novel methods, including this sort of technology. And let me jump, just pause for a second in case any questions pop up.
Well, I love that Carl's mentioning in the chat about collecting coins for UNICEF on Halloween, and that was, he's thinking about it in terms of how you educate about fundraising because one adult put in a piece of candy.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that, the UNICEF box, it's sort of hard to see here. We've got one on view in Giving in America, because that, again, is a very familiar and far-reaching way that a lot of children are introduced to fundraising. They turn an event that's focused on them and fun and whatnot into something that's also giving back. So let me jump forward a few decades to a couple paper objects that we have in the museum that are from the early 1900s. And I'd like to talk about developments in early 20th century fundraising through the lens of African-American philanthropy. This poster here on the left comes from a World War I era effort to raise funds for a hospital in Philadelphia to aid Black service members who were being denied equal access to medical treatment in the armed forces. And then this over here on the right is a donor appreciation list from the National Training School for Girls and Women, established in 1909 in Washington, D.C. by the famed educator Nannie Helen Burroughs. Her school aimed to uplift Black girls and women by giving them skills in the workforce, in activism, and actually in fundraising. Since the early republic, African Americans used their philanthropy to support their communities and the Black freedom struggle. This era, the early 20th century, saw African Americans building national philanthropic institutions and national fundraising campaigns for efforts such as this hospital in Philadelphia or the Burroughs School. And these efforts drew on the growing specialization in marketing and advertising, the development of the distinct advertising industry that's part of the general history of business in the economy in the early 20th century, along with a booming consumer economy. And I think this Crispus Attucks circle sign really shows that impact of advertising industry on philanthropic, promoting philanthropic activity and fundraising with this, really compelling image and I think really compelling language. German shells draw no color line. So I point that out to show, to make a point about how advertising, the growth of advertising was influencing things like philanthropy, selling of war bonds and whatnot, generally. Now this sign, which looks much plainer and maybe more straightforward, I think also tells a really important and deep story if we go a little bit behind it. At its most basic level, I mean, not basic, but sort of most straightforward level, the sign highlights donors to the school as part of a national network. It might be a little hard for you to see, but the donors are listed by state. They list names and churches individuals and churches who donated. So the sign acknowledges the donors and also helps to knit them together as part of a national far-flung community. What I think isn't necessarily obvious to us, though it would have been to many African Americans and maybe others at the time, is the role of women volunteers and women volunteers in particular behind this fundraising. Many of the donors listed are churches where women were often at the forefront of fundraising efforts, and that was true from the establishment of the first independent African American congregations in the late 1790s. Women were vital in their fundraising efforts. And indeed, as historian Victoria Wolcott has explained, Nanny Helen Burroughs so appreciated the importance of women as fundraisers for Black causes that she trained her students in fundraising efforts as they together sought donations for the school. So students were involved in performing at recitations and pageants and plays and concerts, among other things. Those efforts, of course, brought needed funds to the school, but it also gave the students opportunities to develop the skills and confidence that so many of you know are vital to effective fundraising. So behind this straightforward donor appreciation list is a story of Burroughs's own prowess as a fundraiser and her commitment to training her students for futures in which she knew that many would be volunteer fundraisers doing the essential work to support their communities and to advance the cause of Black freedom. Why don't I pause again?
Yeah, thank you. It is interesting to think about that, tie between sort of advertising, marketing, the visual presentation, and how that affects, the ability to fundraise and the success of a fundraiser, but also then in conjunction with good stewardship, with thanking people and recognizing them and training up the next group of fundraisers. So I love both of those stories.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting is the connection between marketing and stewardship. This is something I didn't really understand until I started doing this research. When you, as I don't think I need to tell you this, Angela, but when you get those letters in August that talk about why you should donate to whatever cause you've donated to in the past. And you think, why are they sending this to me now? I do my donations, at the end of the year. That's part of stewardship, and it's part of using those communication techniques to stay connected with supporters of organization. There's just so much sophistication to doing this work that I've really come to appreciate because it is so vital to supporting institutions we all care about. So let me move forward again a few more decades and show you a few objects from the 70s and 80s. And so the things I showed you so far were things that were already in the Smithsonian's existing holdings, in the museum's existing holdings. Here are a bunch of things I've collected, so I have a special place in my heart. This up here, this wooden 2 pull toy is a premium given by Boston's Channel 2, WGBH, 2 donors. That's from the 1970s. And I'll tell you a little bit more after I just explain what everything is about the stories behind them. This is a fundraising advertisement for that 2 toy. And it refers to an umbrella, which was a previous effort you can see here from the wonderful folks who brought you that $30 Channel 2 umbrella. Here's a $30 block of wood on wheels. Up here is a fundraising guide, a binder that was used by a professor named Eugene Temple in the 1980s at the fundraising school, which is in California. And then over here, this is the first page of the first issue of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, published in 1988, and it's signed by the publisher and editor and the staff who were involved that first issue. So let me tell you why I've collected some of these objects. I am really interested in developing a collection that tells the stories of how people have developed and deepened fundraising as a profession, and just develop the practices, whether it's professional or voluntary, the practices of fundraising. And I was thinking a few years ago when we were exploring culture and the arts, particularly about public broadcasting, which is so familiar to so many of us, as a place where we encounter fundraising appeals. I had the opportunity to do oral histories with a couple people involved in public broadcasting development from the early days, and then to collect a few of the objects. And what I learned is, as you all probably know, public broadcasting developed in the late 1960s, and then was burgeoning in the 70s. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was set up as a nonprofit to allow support for public media like WGBH, or here in DC, WETA. And this was new. Having to raise money for this cause was new. And so there was a period when the fundraisers had an incredible amount of latitude. It was just sort of an open field. They could be really creative and try lots of new things. And one of the things that the folks decided to do at WGBH, which was a leader in public broadcasting development, was to start offering fundraising premiums. Now, today that's really familiar, so that may not seem like anything out of the ordinary, but this was new in the 1970s, to give a gift to people who contributed to your cause. The fundraisers for public broadcasting were familiar with higher ed fundraising, where universities would give umbrellas, for instance, to their donors. Higher ed has always been the leader in fundraising. It's just an absolute powerhouse. So borrowing that idea, the WGBH Channel 2 fundraisers started giving out umbrellas, as referred to here, and then they came up with a range of other gifts, such as this 2 toy, and here you see they're advertising it to sort of explain again, what this is about. And what's important there is was a creative way to raise money that the stations needed. It also has an impact on other businesses because businesses developed or existing to create these kind of things, or existing businesses expanded their efforts, their enterprise to create what was needed in the philanthropy industry. So philanthropy economically has an impact of not just taking in money, but catalyzing economic activity. Now, this here, this fundraising school guide and the chronicle, first page of the chronicle, tell really important stories about professionalization in the field. I mean, as we saw, Nanny Helen Burroughs was training her students in the early 20th century. So the idea of training fundraisers was not new. But the late 20th century really sees the professionalization of fundraising with the establishment of organizations dedicated for professional fundraisers, the establishment of the fundraising school, which was first founded in California and San Francisco by a man named Henry Rosso and his wife, Dorothy Rosso. Henry Rosso was a legendary fundraiser who was involved in the March of Dimes, maybe familiar, some of you from the mid 20th century. I know my grandmother went door to door raising money for that cause. It was one of the powerhouse fundraising efforts, philanthropic efforts of the mid 20th century. And Rosso, the Rossos and others felt the need to professionally train fundraisers. So they created the fundraising school. This man, Eugene Temple, was involved, and this was his binder, which has got the curriculum in it, and he's got his notes on how to be an effective fundraiser. Professor Eugene Temple went on to be one of the founding professors, founding dean at what's now the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in Indiana University, one of the premier, really the premier School of Philanthropy, with both a fundraising component, training fundraisers, and the academic study of philanthropy. So this helps to tell that story. And then here, the Chronicle of Philanthropy was established in 1988. And I think it helps us to understand the growth of that industry. It was growing in such importance and sophistication that there was a need and the ability to sustain a newspaper dedicated to philanthropy. That still exists, and now there are a number of other regular newspapers about philanthropy. One of the things, you probably can't see it, but up here on the left, one of the articles in the first issue, this is a story of professionalization, but nevertheless, this top article on the left says, in charitable giving, volunteers lead as the wealthy lag. So recognizing the importance of volunteerism as fundamental to the industry of philanthropy. Well, let me turn to the last couple objects, let's see, to just talk a little bit more about the role of volunteers, even as the field has professionalized. These two objects come from, or were donated by a volunteer to WGBH named Steve Wasserman. Wasserman was a 50-year volunteer at WGBH. This on the left, this purple apron was the major volunteer apron he wore at the fundraising auctions that were held starting in the 70s. And then this was his pad that he would, memo pad for keeping track of bids. As part of that really innovative, creative, fun period in WGBH's history of development, there were annual auctions that were held where people would donate around Boston, people around Boston and New England would donate all sorts of stuff, and you could, they were featured on TV and you could call up and bid on it. Volunteers ran those efforts. I mean, of course, there were staff, development staff, overseeing it, but the volunteers really ran the effort. And it was a week-long effort. It was so important to people that volunteers would take vacation time from their jobs to be involved. It was a way of life, Steve explained to me, being involved with these auctions. And so these two objects tell that story of this period of incredibly fertile, incredibly creative activity in raising money as the stations developed their fundraising capabilities. The story is kind of poignant because what he explained to me is that with the advent of eBay, auctions just changed fundamentally. The model they've been using no longer worked, and WGBH shifted to an online model similar to eBay's, and so they did still need volunteers, but it just wasn't the same kind of activity as it had been, and it was sort of a loss for a lot of the volunteers. This is the kind of change that I'm interested in charting, both the successes and innovations, but also, when things change in a way that people feel there's a loss in how they've been going about their philanthropic activity. And they didn't have the same kind of scope as they did in the early days. Nevertheless, Wasserman stayed involved in WGBH as a volunteer, being a docent for groups visiting from around the country and abroad. And he's also told me he's really proud of the amount of money he raised through being involved in these auctions over the decades. So while he felt this, while there was a poignancy, what I took from what he told me about his role as a longtime volunteer for WGBH is that GBH well recognizes the importance of volunteers to its operations, including to their fundraising operations. That hasn't changed. And I think that while these objects tell a story of professionalization, that is true in general. Volunteers are fundamental and really the foundation of organizations' fundraising operations in so many ways. And I suspect the Clements recognizes that. I know Angela mentioned at the beginning how important that is. And so as I wrap up, I'd like to thank you for listening to me talk about the history of fundraising, which isn't always obviously something that people think of as a area of historical study. So thank you for all of your ideas and suggestions in the chat. And I also particularly want to thank you for supporting the Clements, which has been so important to me, both in terms of my scholarly research and my development as a public historian. Without the opportunity to work at the Clements when I was in grad school, I don't know that I'd be in this position today. So I'm really grateful to the Clements and to all of you.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, as a professional fundraiser, I am a huge advocate of how philanthropy builds community. And in fact, I mean, that's how I got started, because most of us didn't know about the fact that there's a professional fundraising school. We fall into it in some other way. So running the first Buy a Bone campaign at the Natural History Museum showed me what volunteers could do, how it could build community, and just, that really great feeling of accomplishment that everyone gets working together. So I love those stories.
Oh, absolutely. I think that you've hit the nail on the head exactly.
So I would like to do just a couple of housekeeping slides while everybody thinks about their questions, and please put them in the Q&A. And as soon as I finish up on housekeeping, we'll get to the Q&A. Let's see. So we have a new exhibit at the Clements Library that will be open through November 30th, collecting 19th century Cuba. We invite you to come and visit in person on Wednesdays and Fridays from noon to 4:30 to see the exhibit, or to come and take a tour with us. In addition, this weekend, You can see many of us at the Ann Arbor Antiquarian Book Fair from 11 a.m. To 5 p.m. at the Michigan Union Ballroom. The $5 admission helps to benefit the Clements Library. So we'd love to see you there. And I think Anne is going to put in the chat. Last year, we did a bookworm talking about book fairs. So in case you missed that one, you might want to check it out. It's a lot of fun. Next month, in honor of Native American Heritage Month, we will host Michael Witgen, professor in the Department of History and the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Columbia University. He will be discussing his book, Seeing Red: Indigenous Land, American Expansion, and the Political Economy of Plunder in North America. Once you're signed up for the Bookworm, you'll receive reminders every month, and then you can decide to join in person on Friday mornings, or as I mentioned before, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording that you can watch at another time. And once again, I would like to thank Kristen Cabral for sponsoring today's Bookworm. Thank you so much for that, Kristen. If any of you are interested in sponsoring a future episode, you can contact myself or Anne. In addition, I'd love to encourage you to join us in our 75th anniversary celebration by becoming a Clements Library Associate. Any gift to the Clements automatically makes you an associate. And as we mentioned earlier, that is before there were fundraising professionals on staff. The associates were volunteers who helped raise the money and gave collections to promote the Clements Library, and continue to be so today as well. So, all right, let's see what we have for questions, shall we? All right, Cheryl is asking if you have any of the folded shaped collection boxes often used by churches aimed at children. They're still in use today, and she's thinking of some of the uniquely shaped ones like David C. Cook catalogs from the late 19th century had numerous examples that could be purchased for churches to give to children, and that the activity of folding them was part of the appeal.
That's a great example. No, I haven't collected any of those yet. And if anyone has a lead on one, I'd love to hear about it. And more generally, if you have thoughts on objects, I would love to hear about it. But yes, I would love to collect something like that.
Yeah, those kinds of materials are so ephemeral that once they're done, kids played with them. I can remember playing with some of those things in my childhood after, or you turned them in with the coins in them.
Right.
That's the other thing. So so it does make it hard. I mean, we talk about that a lot at the Clements too, that those, the very ephemeral things may not be the most expensive item, but sometimes they're very rare just because even though they were produced in mass numbers, they were tossed out.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's important that has just been mentioned is that they were tactile. Part of the appeal was the folding them, so they're important because it really connects you in a sensory way with this practice of thinking about how to support your church or whatever the cause is, thinking of helping you imagine yourself as part of a larger community. So that's why, and going back to one of the comments in the chat also, there is this camaraderie that comes from doing things in person, like the fundraising auctions or folding things, camaraderie and community building and tactile experience that's so vital that we do lose a bit with the online experience. as much as I enjoyed the opportunity to engage with people online too. And obviously, it opens up possibilities we didn't have otherwise.
Right, right. It's definitely something where, like, in this setting, we can interact with people from all over the country or all over the world, which wasn't isn't the case necessarily when we do something in person. So it's
Right.
nice to have a mix, though.
Absolutely.
Um, so William is wondering a little bit more about the Crispus Attucks sign and wondering how it relates, to the Jim Crow laws sort of separating the races. And so who is this, sign aimed at?
Yeah, I think, let me, if you don't mind, I'll just pull that back up again. So we can look at it together for a sec. The sign is aimed at African Americans and whites. I mean, I think, help. I think it's aimed at a general audience, and this Crispus Attucks Circle for War Relief Work, which was supporting Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia, did have white and Black donors, and perhaps donors of other backgrounds. But I certainly know there were white and Black donors. What I think is important is you're right that it does acknowledge Jim Crow, in that it indicates there are going to be separate hospitals and separate endeavors for African Americans. So it's sort of a hard object in some ways, because it forces us to confront that segregation was used as a fundraising technique, as well as recognizing that segregation was what was, the problem here, of course, in terms of African Americans not having equal access to medical care.
Right, right. Yeah. So interesting dichotomies there.
Yeah, and I just I see that question came from Mr. Cleveland. I just wanted to acknowledge something he had said in the chat about the fundraising school being in Indianapolis. Yes, today it's in Indianapolis at the IUPUI campus. Initially, it was in San Francisco, and then it moved as part of the creation, moved to Indianapolis as part of the creation of the what's become the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy.
Thank you. So Kristen has a couple of interesting ideas for you for donation. She's talking about a circular cardboard and tin top and bottom from an FDR banquet for the March of Dimes from the 30s and 40s. So can we share out your email address, or is there some other way that people can contact you if they have potential items?
Yes, you can share my email address. I'd be happy to pop it in the chat if that's helpful.
Great.
I love, we do carefully vet things because we have very limited storage space at the Smithsonian, which I'm sure is true, familiar to you folks at the Clements too. But I always love to hear about possible objects that we can acquire. So thank you very much.
Yes, and it's always interesting to see what kinds of things get saved too. So we talked about how things get thrown away, but then, if something is saved, what does that say about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when something's saved and people have a story, remember the story, and it's been important to them, that's really so powerful. Like I said about that little collection box at the beginning, even though I love it, we don't know the particular story behind it. So when there is an object where we know, a lot about, the big story it tells, but also the individual story it tells, it's so meaningful.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I was wondering about is what do you know what is the earliest thing in the collection, in the philanthropy collection?
So the philanthropy collection, as I was saying, philanthropy is a new collecting area. The formal philanthropy collection was established in 2015, so it's not very old compared to collections that have go back to the 19th century as collecting areas. although we do have holdings, as I've suggested, we do have objects that are existing holdings related to philanthropy. But in terms of what's in the philanthropy collection, it's only about 192 objects compared to some, something like numismatics, which has a million. So very small and new. The oldest thing comes from around World War I. I don't have anything earlier than that yet. A lot of the collecting I've done has been more contemporary, the past 50 years. People have more of those objects. It's a little bit rarer to find some of the older objects, but hopefully over time.
Good point. Yes. Yeah. I love that Kristen's also sharing a not so good childhood fundraising memory, because went door to door in bad weather, which is definitely something that I know my kids don't seem to do as much anymore. Going door to door doesn't seem to be quite as popular, but I certainly remember doing that as well. Although I tried to pick better weather.
Yeah, right.
So I was also thinking about some of the somewhere in the chat, someone mentioned selling Girl Scout cookies, because that's another at the time fairly innovative fundraiser. I'm assuming that has really, continued.
Absolutely. My daughter was a Girl Scout for several years. It's really, I think, a great program in teaching kids fundraising and business skills and helping them support their troop and, developing the confidence. Because I think one of the things that's so important about these efforts that enlist kids in raising funds for various causes is that they instill confidence. You need to be able to explain what you're doing and why it's important. Talk to people who you may not know. And I think that's just great in terms of skill building, as well as, being important to bringing in money that these organizations do. It helps children understand the finances of institutions. I haven't collected anything relating to the Girl Scouts because one of my colleagues, who's responsible for the fraternal collections, is responsible for the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts as part of fraternal organizations and community organizations. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of overlap. He has a really wonderful collection. I mean, the Smithsonian has a really wonderful collection under his responsibility of Girl Scout objects, including some, really early uniforms and whatnot. And I think he has a cookie box as part of that collection.
Hopefully not with cookies still in it.
Well, no, I think he was a sport and ate the cookies because we could not have the cookies in storage. So he made his contribution by eating the cookies before bringing in the box.
I do think that you mentioned oral histories as well, which I think is always, I think the Smithsonian does a good job of pairing all of these paper things with the ability to interview people and to talk to people about their experiences. So can you tell me a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, that's really been something that's been incredibly stimulating and moving to me. As an early American historian, my scholarly research has focused on early America, but in this role, I'm responsible for the full sweep of American history. So as an early Americanist, I'd never done an oral history, of course. This was completely new. And it's really humbling and an honor that people will talk with me and entrust me with their stories and objects. So I've been doing oral histories with people sort of across the field of philanthropy, both prominent individuals and then grassroots leaders and people who work in development, just to get the landscape. And that's included a number of people who work in development or then volunteers. And these oral histories will live in our archive center and be available for research there, for people to consult. for research or non-research purposes, and they'll inform our exhibitions and programs and whatnot. Several colleagues and I have recently begun an endeavor to focus particularly on the history of African American fundraising as one of the building blocks of thinking about the history of fundraising generally. So we're hoping to do some more collecting and hopefully some oral histories focused specifically on African American experience in fundraising.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Well, I'll look forward to seeing more about that. I see lots of stories continuing to come in the chat, so I'll be sure to share those with you in case you didn't have a chance to read them all. And we really appreciate everybody continuing to tell your stories about fundraising and some of your first memories of it, and what kinds of impact it might have had on you. So I appreciate everyone for chiming in and for joining us this morning. And Amanda, this has been a great conversation, really interesting and informative. And as you mentioned, of course, it's changed since then as you continue to rotate the exhibit.
Mhm.
But I did stop by when I was visiting the museum a few years ago and loved the exhibit. So anyone who's traveling to Washington, D.C., please be sure to check it out. And in the meantime, you can look forward to an email from us later today with some of these links and information. And thanks again, Amanda, for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.